We've just got some breaking news in from Buckingham Palace, folks. So this statement has just come in from Buckingham Palace, and I'll read it for you. It goes on to say, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and...
The discovery inside the royal vault did not merely expose a private financial decision. It reopened one of the deepest wounds between two brothers who had spent years pretending the damage could still be contained. When sealed records connected to Queen Elizabeth II revealed that a private reserve had been assigned solely to William, Harry broke his silence. And what he said turned a hidden inheritance into something far more dangerous, a judgment on belonging itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The truth emerged during a private inventory review, when a sealed vault file was opened against Elizabeth's instructions. The Royal Vault is a secure store for sensitive family records and private papers. Inside was a dated authorization showing that Queen Elizabeth II had directed a significant pool of her personal funds solely to Prince William. Harry received no share from that reserve. These were not public crown finances, but Elizabeth's private assets, making the discovery deeply personal. Harry received confirmation at home and read the wording twice. Then he placed his phone face down and said nothing. Meghan watched him retreat into silence. She stayed close before he finally admitted that the money was not the wound. What hurt was the possibility that his grandmother had made a final choice between the brothers. The reserve suddenly looked less like inheritance and more like a message from beyond the grave. William learned soon after that Harry had seen the document. He understood immediately how dangerous the wording could become. The prince felt gratitude toward Elizabeth, but also guilt, because the reserve seemed to prove a painful story, that one grandson had been trusted while the other had been pushed outside. Harry finally broke his silence through a statement delivered to a trusted contact and documented in writing. He said he would not fight over money, but he would not pretend the document carried no emotional meaning. Inside palace circles, that sentence landed like an accusation. Charles received a copy of the statement and read it beside his desk. The king removed his glasses, lowered the page, and stood without speaking. He knew the crisis had moved beyond wealth. Now everyone would ask why Elizabeth had made the decision. Then one handwritten reference inside the vault file changed everything. It pointed to a private conversation Elizabeth had held with William before the instruction was finalized. And to understand why she placed him alone beside that reserve, the story had to move away from the money and into the two grandsons who came to represent completely different futures for the crown. Long before the vault door opened, William and Harry occupied different emotional positions inside the monarchy. They were brothers, shaped by the same loss, loved by the same grandmother, and watched by the same institution. But as adulthood hardened around them, their paths separated. Elizabeth began looking at William as the man who would one day carry the crown, while Harry increasingly fought against the very structure that defined his family. William had spent years being prepared for a future he could never simply walk away from. As heir-in-waiting after Charles, he was expected to understand estates, constitutional duties, family obligations, and the machinery that would one day surround his reign. The term heir-in-waiting simply meant the person preparing to inherit the throne after the current direct successor. Elizabeth never treated that future as a prize. To her, it was weight, responsibility, a life where personal freedom would always come second. Harry had once found his own sense of purpose far away from that machinery. Military service gave him an identity that felt earned rather than inherited. But when he later stepped back from working royal life, the distance grew. He was no longer part of the same private meetings, family routines, or institutional conversations that had once kept him close to his grandmother. The change did not erase affection, but it altered access, trust, and expectation. William sat alone after receiving the inheritance file and remembered how Elizabeth spoke about duty, never reward. never entitlement. That memory made the discovery harder, not easier. He knew the document could make him appear chosen over his brother, even if his grandmother had meant something entirely different. The future king did not feel victorious. He felt exposed. Harry carried another set of memories: quiet conversations, private jokes, tea shared without ceremony, Elizabeth's warmth toward his children. Those moments now collided with one brutal fact. The reserve carried William's name alone. He struggled to reconcile affection with exclusion. The pain became sharper because no lawyer's explanation could remove the personal meaning he saw in it. Charles called William privately, without aides or advisors listening. The king warned him not to become defensive if Harry reacted angrily. William answered carefully. If Elizabeth had intended the money as punishment, he said, he wanted no part in using it that way. Charles paused before replying that they still did not know what she had truly intended. Then a palace archivist found the phrase that shifted the entire argument. The file described the reserve as being for continuity and stewardship, meaning its holder was expected to protect and manage it for long-term family responsibilities, not simply spend it as personal wealth. But one date beside that wording carried a darker implication. Elizabeth had approved it only days after a bitter private encounter involving both brothers. That encounter would later be remembered as the moment she stopped waiting for William and Harry to repair themselves, and began planning for what happened if they never did. Every family rupture has one moment that becomes impossible to forget. For Elizabeth, it came during a private Windsor conversation, when the pain between William and Harry was no longer hidden behind formal smiles. What began as an attempt to restore trust ended with one grandson walking away, another remaining behind, and the Queen facing a truth she had resisted for years. Within days, the financial instruction later found in the vault was put into motion. Elizabeth arranged the meeting because she believed there was still one chance to stop personal anger from shaping the monarchy's future. Windsor had become neutral ground, away from cameras and public pressure. A private royal meeting meant an off-record family discussion with no formal ceremony attached. The Queen wanted clarity about trust, leaking private conversations, and whether Harry still expected any structured role around the institution after stepping back from official duties. Harry arrived already guarded. He had spent too long feeling that every family conversation eventually became a discussion about loyalty to the crown. When Elizabeth asked whether he still wanted a defined long-term connection to royal life, he answered sharply that his relationship with his grandmother should never be measured by whether he served the institution. William did not raise his voice. He replied that nobody was questioning love, but duty created responsibilities that could not be claimed only when convenient. Elizabeth felt the room tighten. She told both brothers to stop turning grief, resentment, and old wounds into a competition over who had suffered more. Harry pushed his chair backward. He said he would not remain in a conversation where he was treated like a problem waiting to be managed. The Queen asked him to stay. He refused. William watched his brother leave before the discussion was finished. William remained behind, but Elizabeth offered him no comfort. Instead, she asked a harder question. Did he understand that becoming king might mean accepting advantages he never requested while carrying resentment he could never fully escape? The prince paused before answering yes. The Queen told him that privilege without responsibility would destroy trust, both inside the family and outside it. Days later, Elizabeth summoned her private secretary and changed instructions connected to a protected reserve of personal funds. A private secretary is the senior aide trusted with sensitive royal decisions and correspondence. Her documented instruction described the reserve not as a reward for William, but as money tied to long-term family stewardship, placing control under one line of responsibility. Harry knew none of this chronology when the meeting ended. Years later, after the vault discovery, he finally saw the dates beside each other. Windsor came first. The financial instruction followed days later. That sequence changed everything. Harry became convinced that walking out had triggered Elizabeth's decision. And once he understood that William had remained behind, silence was impossible, because only his brother could tell him what the Queen had said after the door closed. Harry did not ask William for money. He asked him for the truth. Once the dates surrounding Elizabeth's instruction became clear, the inheritance dispute transformed into something far more painful. What had their grandmother said after Harry walked out of Windsor? The answer belonged to William alone. And when the brothers finally spoke directly, years of unfinished resentment entered the conversation with them, turning a financial revelation into a reckoning between Diana's sons. Harry requested the conversation without secretaries, lawyers, or palace intermediaries. He wanted no prepared language and no message passed through another office. William agreed, because he understood that another layer of royal management would only deepen suspicion. A palace intermediary is simply an aide or official who carries messages between family members instead of allowing them to speak directly. This time, the brothers would have nowhere to hide. Harry opened with the question that had been consuming him. "What did she say after I left?" William did not answer immediately. The prince knew that repeating Elizabeth's private words could turn grief into another weapon. Harry pressed harder. He said he did not want the institution's version, and he did not want an explanation written by advisors. He wanted the truth from his brother. William finally told him that Elizabeth had been deeply upset after the Windsor meeting, but not because Harry rejected royal life. She feared something more permanent. The Queen believed distrust between the brothers had grown so deep that neither man could separate family pain from public duty anymore. Harry listened, then answered that the financial instructions still looked brutally simple. One grandson received the reserve, the other did not. William felt the accusation land. He explained that Elizabeth had never described the money to him as a reward. She spoke about responsibility, future obligations, family support, estates, and commitments connected to the monarchy that would eventually fall on his shoulders. The reserve, he said, was presented as something to protect and manage, not something to celebrate. Harry asked the question William had expected. Did he know he would receive it alone? The future king admitted that he knew their grandmother was restructuring private arrangements, but he had never seen the final wording. Harry turned away from the conversation for a moment. William reached toward the folder containing the copied records, then stopped. He understood that paperwork could no longer solve what was happening between them. Harry remained unconvinced. He said intention mattered, but so did impact. William did not argue. Instead, he gave his brother one final answer. There was someone else who knew more. Charles had been told about Elizabeth's broader purpose before her death. That changed the direction of the crisis completely. For the first time, the argument moved beyond the brothers, to the man who became king, and who had carried one crucial piece of Elizabeth's reasoning in silence. Charles had known enough to understand the decision, but not enough to prevent the pain it would eventually cause. For years, he protected his mother's private financial instructions because they belonged to her, not to the crown. Now that secrecy was hurting both his sons. With Harry demanding meaning, and William carrying an inheritance he never asked to defend, the king faced a choice Elizabeth had avoided: explain why she trusted one grandson with the reserve, or allow silence to define her forever. Charles sat with the original explanatory note before speaking to Harry. Camilla noticed him reading the same paragraph again and again. The king finally admitted that whatever he said would sound to one son like a defense of the other. These privately controlled assets were different from institutional crown property, meaning Elizabeth could direct them through her own personal instructions, rather than treat them as public royal resources. That distinction mattered, because the reserve had been built around long-term management, not equal division. Charles had understood the broad purpose before his mother died. Elizabeth believed that William would eventually inherit obligations reaching far beyond his own household. Properties, family dependence, charitable commitments, and the continuing demands of monarchy would increasingly settle around him. The prince was not simply receiving money. He was being assigned responsibility for what that money was expected to protect. Harry asked the question directly during a private recorded call with his father. Had Elizabeth been punishing him for leaving royal life? Charles answered no. Harry did not soften. He said, intention did not erase impact, because whatever his grandmother meant, the document still left him staring at William's name, where his own was absent. The king could not dismiss that. He admitted that Elizabeth may have underestimated how brutally the arrangement would feel once separated from her explanation. Charles then revealed the principle behind the decision. His mother believed equal love did not always require equal responsibility. William would carry the burden of monarchy, extended family support, and dynastic preservation, the long-term protection of the family line and its obligations. For Elizabeth, placing the reserve with him was not a declaration of affection. It was an assignment. Harry went quiet, then asked something more painful. Had she ever mentioned him by name? Charles hesitated before reading from the documented note. Elizabeth had specifically instructed that other personal arrangements for family members remain separate from this stewardship fund. She had considered Harry. She had not simply forgotten him. That realization cut through some of the anger, but it created another problem. William now understood that leaving the reserve untouched could make his grandmother's purpose look colder than she intended. He began considering a decision no advisor expected, one that would test whether honoring Elizabeth meant protecting every word she wrote, or protecting the responsibility behind them. The vault had given William something more uncomfortable than wealth. It had given him control over a symbol of everything dividing him from Harry. Keeping the reserve exactly as Elizabeth instructed would be legally simple. Emotionally, it was becoming impossible. After hearing his brother's pain and his father's explanation, William began asking a dangerous question inside palace walls. Could he respect his grandmother's purpose without allowing her private decision to become another permanent scar between Diana's sons? William met a small group of advisors to understand exactly what authority he held. The prince learned that stewardship meant control with responsibility, the power to manage assets for an intended purpose, rather than simply treat them as personal spending money. Elizabeth's instruction placed the reserve under his control, but it did not force him to ignore the wider family obligations attached to it. That distinction gave him room to act. Palace officials urged caution. They warned that any emotional financial gesture could be portrayed as an attempt to rewrite Elizabeth's wishes or calm public pressure. William listened, but irritation began to show. He knew the problem was bigger than headlines. If he did nothing, the reserve could become permanent proof, at least in Harry's mind, that their grandmother had chosen one brother and rejected the other. William left the meeting, returned to his private office, and closed the door. Harry's original statement was still there, folded beside the vault summary. Catherine found him reading it again. The princess understood why the words had unsettled him. She told him that refusing to recognize his brother's pain could turn an administrative decision into a family verdict Elizabeth may never have intended. William admitted the conflict plainly. He could not erase his grandmother's instruction, and he would not pretend the document said something different. But he also refused to let anyone use it as proof that he was the chosen grandson. Catherine reminded him that responsibility meant judgment, not blind obedience. That idea stayed with him. William then made the decision palace advisors had feared. He would not split the main reserve as a simple inheritance payment. Instead, the future king proposed creating a protected family provision within his own stewardship authority, allowing agreed long-term support connected to Harry's children, while leaving Elizabeth's central reserve under the structure she had established. William called Charles personally and explained the plan. The king remained silent for several seconds. Then he said something that changed the weight of the entire decision. His mother had trusted William to exercise judgment. For the prince, obedience suddenly became responsibility. But one final step remained. Harry could not learn about this through lawyers, statements, or another palace messenger. William decided he would tell his brother himself. The two men had spent years communicating through interviews, aids, accusations, and silence. Now there would be nowhere to hide. There was no advisor in the room, no prepared statement, and no royal protocol capable of softening what needed to be said. William had a proposal, but Harry wanted something more important first: acknowledgement. For years, each brother believed the other had misunderstood the cost of his choices. Elizabeth's money had forced that argument back into the open. Yet in their most private exchange since the vault revelation, neither man began with inheritance. They began with their grandmother. William explained the protected family provision carefully. The prince would not pretend Elizabeth had ordered an equal split when she had not, and he would not rewrite the reserve as though her instruction meant nothing. A protected family provision simply meant money set aside under controlled terms for agreed future responsibilities. He intended to preserve the stewardship structure while using his authority to make sure Harry's children were not treated as though they stood completely outside the family Elizabeth had spent her life trying to hold together. Harry listened, but money still was not his main concern. He told William that he had never demanded half of the reserve. What wounded him was the fear that his grandmother's final private judgment had reduced their relationship to whether he remained useful to the monarchy. Seeing only William's name, he admitted, felt like the family had once again turned emotional distance into official language. William did not argue this time. He said being named had never felt like victory. It felt like another burden he would be judged for carrying. The future king finally acknowledged that Harry had every reason to be hurt by how the document looked, even if Elizabeth's purpose had been different. That admission changed the tone between them. Harry gave something back. He conceded that walking out of the Windsor conversation may have convinced Elizabeth that he wanted his future completely separated from structures she still considered permanent. He did not apologize for leaving royal life, but he admitted that his grandmother may have interpreted the moment more broadly than he intended. William then revealed the one detail he had held back. According to his documented recollection of the Windsor meeting, Elizabeth's final words after Harry left were not about property, titles, or money. She told William not to let duty become an excuse for losing his brother. Harry went silent. For several moments, neither man tried to fill the space. Harry eventually said he would not publicly challenge the fund. He also agreed that Elizabeth's stewardship distinction should be explained accurately, rather than turned into proof that she loved one grandson more than the other. It was not reconciliation. Too much remained broken for that. But it was the first moment in the crisis when both brothers stopped trying to win. Inside the family, the temperature had finally fallen. Outside the gates, however, news of the vault document had escaped palace control. And the world was preparing a far harsher verdict. By morning, Elizabeth's private decision was no longer private. The world did what the royal family had feared from the beginning: reduced years of duty, hurt, separation, and responsibility to one brutal comparison. William received the reserve. Harry did not. The nuance vanished beneath headlines. Crowds gathered, broadcasters argued over favoritism, and palace phones began ringing. Yet one image outside Windsor captured the public mood more powerfully than any commentator could. Harry watched the coverage repeat the same phrase. He had been cut out. Meghan heard the language harden with every broadcast and told him the story was being turned into humiliation instead of explanation. A stewardship arrangement simply meant money placed under someone's control, for a defined long-term responsibility, not an ordinary personal gift. That distinction mattered because Elizabeth's private reserve was separate from crown property and public royal funds. But television panels had little patience for nuance. Harry felt the old anger rising, yet he chose restraint. A second statement was drafted, then abandoned. Meghan agreed that another public attack would destroy the fragile progress he had made with William. The decision cost him. Silence now meant watching strangers define his relationship with his grandmother, but speaking recklessly could reopen the wound between the brothers before it had even begun to close. William faced the opposite accusation. Headlines described him as Elizabeth's favored grandson, language that made the prince deeply uncomfortable. Catherine reminded him that responding emotionally would only feed the competition their grandmother had tried to prevent. The future king understood the trap. Defending himself could sound triumphant. Defending Harry could sound guilty. Outside Windsor Castle, the argument suddenly became human. A small crowd gathered as newspapers arrived carrying photographs of the brothers beneath one brutal line: one queen, 2 grandsons, 1 heir. Cameras caught a woman stepping forward and placing flowers near the gates, with a handwritten note. She loved them both. Within hours, that simple message was everywhere. Then the public narrative began to shift. A major evening broadcast cited the documented stewardship wording and explained that Elizabeth had tied the reserve to William's future obligations, rather than presenting it as a reward for being more loved. Commentators stopped asking only who had received more. They began asking what duty had meant to the Queen in the final years of her life. Harry watched that change without celebrating. William saw it too. Neither man mistook better headlines for healing. The vault had exposed Elizabeth's decision. The headlines had distorted it. Now the noise was finally fading, and only one question remained inside the family. Would this end as another royal fracture? Or would William, Harry, and Charles finally decide what Elizabeth's choice truly meant? In the end, the money was never the true inheritance. The vault exposed something more complicated. Elizabeth had separated love from duty, in a way her family did not immediately understand. William received control because she believed the future weight of the monarchy would rest upon him. Harry experienced that choice as exclusion, because he had spent years fearing that leaving royal service also meant losing his place inside the family. Both reactions could be true. Neither had to become permanent. William kept Elizabeth's private reserve under the stewardship structure she had created. Stewardship meant holding and managing something for a long-term purpose, rather than treating it as simple personal wealth. The prince understood why that distinction mattered. His grandmother had not handed him a prize. She had placed future responsibility in his hands because she believed property, family obligations, charitable commitments, and the weight of monarchy would one day gather around him. William also moved forward with a separate protected family provision under his own authority. He did not rewrite Elizabeth's instruction, or pretend she had ordered an equal division. Instead, the future king used the discretion she had trusted him with to recognize that family responsibility could not be measured only through estates and accounts. It also meant preventing old wounds from becoming permanent inheritance. Harry received confirmation of the arrangement and felt no sense of financial victory. His attention stayed on the explanation attached to it. Elizabeth had considered his place. She had not ranked her grandsons by affection. She had separated the future burden William would carry from the personal relationships she held with both men. For Harry, that distinction did not erase the pain, but it finally gave the pain a different meaning. William kept the original vault letter, yet he refused suggestions that it should ever be used as proof that Elizabeth preferred him. Catherine heard him describe the document in far simpler terms. His grandmother had given him a responsibility, not a trophy. The princess understood that this was the only interpretation he was willing to carry forward. Harry then spoke with William privately, one final time. He told his brother he would not challenge the reserve. The prince answered that he had never wanted their grandmother's money to become another reason they stopped speaking. There was no dramatic reconciliation, and no claim that years of damage had disappeared. But the argument over Elizabeth's intent ended there. Charles accepted the understanding reached between his sons. The king ordered that Elizabeth's explanatory records remain preserved alongside the full stewardship context, ensuring that her decision could not later be reduced to a simple story of favoritism. The verdict was finally clear. Elizabeth chose William to carry a financial burden because she believed he would one day carry the crown. Harry's pain exposed the human cost of duty. William's response stopped that duty from becoming a weapon. The vault had revealed responsibility, not preference. Harry recovered the meaning, William accepted the burden, and the monarchy emerged with one hard truth intact. Inheritance could divide wealth, but it did not have to define love. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.